microphones without clipping. For the panelists, we clip. Um, Good morning, everyone. Morning. It's great to see everyone bright and early after what was hopefully a illuminating night. I was going to say fun and entertaining, but actually there was a lot of pretty profound things said on stage. And I'm really grateful for our three guests to have set us up in such a strong way. We have a whole bunch of equally exciting programming for the rest of the day. So I just wanted to first of all just welcome all of you. It's amazing to see all of you here with us. Again, as a reminder, for those of you who are like, who is this guy? I'm Asim Khwaja. I am the faculty director of the Center for International Development. And so I'm here to just start off the day with you. My partner from the leadership of WAF, Iris, will come up soon and give more substantive comments. There's a general theme over here that I'm mostly just doing unsubstantive, simple comments like I did last night. Let me just start off by just sharing a video about what this year has been about, just to give you a sense of that. So if we could just play the video to start off with.
What does it mean to build a thriving world for all? How do we invest in a world where all people can go beyond surviving to thriving?
So I grew up in Nigeria and then I lived in Pakistan. And what I loved growing up in these countries, even as a child, I was struck by how different people's trajectories are and how much events outside of one's control can shape them.
At CID, we work across Harvard University and a global network of researchers and practitioners to build an international pool of talent, convene academic and practitioner networks, and deploy breakthrough research to address the world's most pressing challenges. Nowhere is the need more urgent than when it comes to gender equality and building a world where all women and all girls thrive. We've just passed the halfway point of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, and we are leaving more than half the world behind. At this rate, the UN calculates it will take an estimated 300 years to end child marriage, 286 years to close gaps in legal protection and remove discriminatory laws, 140 years for women to be represented equally in positions of power and leadership in the workplace, and 47 years to achieve equal representation in national parliaments.
Are you willing to wait that long for gender equity? Because we're not. At the Women in Public Policy program at Harvard Kennedy School, we empower leaders and change makers with rigorous evidence-based research that advances women and gender equity. We're combating the sobering status quo with an ever-growing body of applicable knowledge about what works and what doesn't work, to close gender gaps in the economy, in politics, in health and education around the world, in the global south and in the global north. That's why we're delighted to collaborate with the Center for International Development in conjunction with our Women's Leadership Board to leverage our collective expertise at the 2024 Global Empowerment Meeting.
The Women in Public Policy program is the perfect partner for CID to bring together some of the world's best thinkers, doers, and funders at GEM24, breaking barriers for women and girls. Our journey started early this year on our road to GEM. We've examined the issue of gender equality from multiple angles, from leading experts, including many from developing countries.
In so many parts of the world, people think we're done. They think that we've reached gender equality, when in fact, the World Economic Forum told us this year that it's going to take 131 additional years before we see parity between men and women on this planet.
There's huge promise and there's huge energy around these issues at this moment in time. In communities, in workplaces, women are organizing and coming together.
Now we're ready to scale up and push through solutions. GEM is not your typical conference. It is a place where ideas are generated and refined, where new partnerships are formed, where groundbreaking research is ideated. The hidden gem, that's in the partnership between researchers and practitioners.
I'm looking forward to having those issues talked about and also meeting so many different people.
GEM is about making something happen, generating new research and partnerships so that together we can build a thriving world for all. Thanks for being part of this journey. Now, It's time to roll up our sleeves and get to work.
So I want to connect a bit briefly what happened last night. I see Ashley. Thank you again, Ashley. And I think Smriti is somewhere here as well. Thank you again. One of the things you heard last night was exactly this call to action. That it's not just enough to share these stories, which is super powerful, but it's also really important to actually take tangible action to change the situation we see ourselves in, especially in terms of not being able to hit the SDG goals. I want to just highlight one thing. There's an amazing lineup today for all of you. You should have seen it. We're going to start with panels. We're going to start with keynotes as well. But I want to highlight, to me, what is in some ways the most unique part of today for you, which is the incubation rooms. And the reason I want to highlight these incubation rooms is these rooms are a fundamental commitment by us collectively, WAP and CID, in really bringing us together as a call for action. So these rooms are essentially going to incubate ideas, which we will support. And just to be very clear about this, we have supported this. So last year, CID launched its inaugural GEM Incubation Fund with the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. And the idea of this fund was, it's great to have people come together, but what we really want from these events, these conferences, these meetings, these workshops, is for people to collaborate with each other, to build this economy of nurturance, to use a word I'm loving. Thank you, Ashley, again for that word. But to really build this collaborative process. This fund, just to let you know, last year, our conference was joint with the Salata Institute. It was on climate change and development. We had 7 recipients that we gave seed funding to who came from this conference, from these incubation rooms last year. These were in partnership with the Mittal Institute, the South Asia Institute, and the awards represented universities from the US, from the UK, from Pakistan, from Argentina, with research projects in the developing world. And the research focused on climate-related topics from climate education in Somalia to solar geoengineering in Buenos Aires. We also, again, through the generous support of the Harvard Radcliffe Institute, we funded 2 workshops focused on Bangladesh and the Gulf of Guinea. So this is really bringing action into what we're doing today. This year, we're happy to announce the second GEM Incubation Fund, which will come from this conference, from these incubation rooms you'll see in the afternoon. We really hope these conversations you will have, and I encourage you to look, if you haven't already, on your schedules. There are 5 different incubation rooms. Look at them, see which ones really appeal to you. We have some phenomenal researchers and practitioners in those rooms leading conversations. And what we invite you to do is join us in those conversations, because sometimes learning can be very passive. You come listen to a panel and it's exciting, but you don't feel engaged in it. I see Nima over here, thank you, from the Radcliffe Institute as well. We want you to experience not just research or practice as it's talked about, but as it develops. We want you to see what it means to take an idea from its very early stages about what is the problem we should be thinking about? Why is this problem there? To the next stage of saying, how do we actually come together to work out a solution? I don't want you to just see the solutions when they're finished. I want you to do the solutions before we even have started thinking about the problems. That process of co-creation is a process we want you to really understand, because we believe that the only way to truly understand a problem is to be involved in that process of co-creation. And in many ways, we think this is the future of development as a field. Development as a field which we want us to be collaborative. It's no longer just the North helping the South with resources and money. That's not the world we live in now. The world we live in now is a world of equal collaborations and partnerships, where the North and the South and the West and the East can come together both intellectually, financially, and in terms of just a will to make change. And you saw a lot of this reflected actually in our dinner conversation last night. I'm also excited this year to announce that the GEM Incubation Fund will be supported by the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard and the Harvard Data Science Initiative as well. With that, I will introduce Iris. Iris is someone who I have personally learned tremendous amount from. When I first joined the Kennedy School, she was a senior faculty. I was a fledgling junior faculty. And over the years, she has been just a tremendous role model, both as a faculty member as an academic dean, and honestly a tremendous leader in this space. So Iris, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Asim, and good morning, everyone. Wonderful to see you, wonderful to have many of you back from last night. I want to, in fact, pick up on something that also was mentioned last night, also by the wonderful Ashley Judd, and that is that stories are really important, that we have to tell the stories about our experiences and about other people's experiences. And I want to tell you 4 stories. 4 stories that are backed by empirical evidence. So, you know, for a researcher, that makes, of course, my heart sing in some interesting ways. So the first story starts in 1993, when India amended its constitution with the provision that 1/3 of village head positions had to be reserved for women. It turns out that this was a natural experiment, which again is really important from a research perspective, because the villages were picked randomly out of a hat. So that allowed, in fact, quite a number of papers, more than 20 today, to evaluate what difference does difference make. Do these women leaders make different policies? Do these women leaders make different choices? Do these women leaders impact women in different ways? And all of that has been studied, but the one I want to highlight here in particular is that in villages that had been exposed to at least 2 female leaders, perceptions of what political leadership looks like started to change. People started to associate political leadership with women to the degree that parents wanted their daughters to become politicians. That's the power of role models. Seeing really is believing, and it's important to see people who we might not typically expect in certain roles in those positions. I'm going to quickly go to the global north for another example, and that is Finland. Many of you probably don't know that until a few years ago, Finland had quotas for male elementary school teachers because they understood that girls and boys needed exposure to role models, and that boys in our schools, where of course now 85 to 90% of the teachers are women, that boys also needed male role models. Research shows that when the quota was abolished, it hurt both boys and girls. So diversity has many interesting facets and many, many benefits. Both of these policies in Finland and in India, of course, came about because of government intervention. And that's my first point for you here. We need to think about good policymaking. We need to think about public policy and how public policy can affect gender equity. My second example. A few years ago, Brazil introduced some regulations to make hiring for the public service more impartial. That included, for example, better screening procedures, including removing names from resumes. It also included better interview procedures, moving from unstructured interviews to structured interviews. It turns out that research, again, shows that it did matter, that it changed the gender gap in evaluations of applicants. It also increased the likelihood that women would apply, and it increased the likelihood that women were hired. Note the second point. That's actually an important one that is often forgotten. When we level the playing field, when we make this world more fair, we will attract more talent, because the talent now knows that they have a fair chance. So changing our organizational practices and procedures is as important potentially as changing public policy. So that's my second takeaway for you. In addition to public policy, we need to focus on what organizations, whether that is in the private sector, in the public sector, in NGOs, independent of where the organization is, we have to fix those procedures to really level the playing field and give meritocracy a real chance and allow women and everyone to climb up the career ladder. Now, my third leg of this three-legged stool right now, you'll see it has to have a fourth leg to be really stable, but my third leg are social norms. Social norms are not written down typically. They're invisible, they're understandings. They help us coordinate, they help us do our business. They have lots of advantages, but they also can hold us back. They also turn out to be pretty sticky, but they can be changed, which takes me to Saudi Arabia, where some really interesting research shows that Saudi men, Saudi husbands, I should be more precise, are more willing to allow and support their women in working outside of the home when they know that other husbands are willing to do so. Right? That's kind of the power of social norms, in that we want to go with the crowd. We want to go with what other people think, and very often we have wrong expectations about other people's beliefs. Research right here at Harvard has taken some of these insights into very different places, back to Brazil, but also to Africa, Nigeria, focused on the power of television, of art, of media, kind of building again on yesterday's discussion, kind of showing that you can affect people's attitudes to HIV/AIDS, you can affect gender-based violence by exposing people to counter stereotypical messages, to counter stereotypical role models, to information that they might not normally hear about and that might affect their beliefs about what the social norm is. So my third pillar for you is social norms, right? We need to think about public policy, we need to think about what organizations do, and we need to think about those social norms. And finally, my fourth leg for our stool here is individual agency. Everything I've talked about so far is a bit more in the context in which we function and is super important. But at the end of the day, we also need to think about what agency people have, women have, girls have, to not just move up the career ladder, but in fact, in my next research example, also out of Harvard here, even as they are going to school. This is really important research where people have looked at whether when we give girls, so think girls, right? These are school-age children, middle school typically. When we give girls negotiation training, is that going to empower them to assert their agency, including with their parents, including with their teachers, including with their sugar daddies? And it turns out it helps. It turns out that, in fact, it helps very much in Zambia, where the research was done on the ground. So, we also need to think about agency. We need to do the social norms, we need to do our work in our organizations, and we have to work on public policy. If you're interested in learning more about any of the studies I just mentioned, please visit the Women in Public Policy Program's Gender Action Portal, GAP for short. It's an online platform that I know many of you know, and that, of course, was generally supported by the Women's Leadership Board present here today. It summarizes research for decision makers, policymakers around the world. It's been used by more than 1 million users now. It's one of our passions, also of this conference, to make sure that we're not staying in the ivory tower, but we're making accessible to knowledge that we need to change the world. And that's not a small ask, that is our ask to all of you for our conference. Please help us make the world a better place for everyone. Thank you.
Transition now. Thank you, Eris, so much for those amazing remarks. We're going to transition now to our first panel. So if I could invite Jennifer Moore from GBH News to come on up. Jennifer is going to introduce our panel, and we'll get started. And we'll please, if you're on the first panel, please come on up.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you all. We can go ahead and have our panelists come on up. Thank you all. Welcome. Hi, Gary. As Fatima mentioned, I work as the features editor here at GBH News in Boston, and that is the NPR and PBS station. It's very, very, very nice to be here with all of you. We're going to go ahead and get started with our first panel of the day. We've got a full day planned. I know Fatima and Asim and others have been working very hard and a long time for this, and I'm honored to be here with such an esteemed panel this morning. Today's panel is going to be on innovative interventions to advance gender equity. And as I mentioned, we're honored to be joined by several esteemed leaders who have made this their life's work, particularly on breaking down barriers for women and girls in the development sector. So what we're going to do today is have our panel discuss several interventions that are working, so some success ideas, and also we're going to dive deep into issues like men and boys in gender equity, feminist grassroots leadership, addressing social norms through edutainment, and also unpaid care work. So I'm pleased now to introduce our panelists, starting with Professor Eliana LaFerrara. Eliana LaFerrara is a professor of public policy here at the Harvard Kennedy School. Her research focuses on development economics and political economics, particularly on the role of social factors in economic development. She studied ethnic diversity, kin structure and social norms, and the effects of television on social outcomes. Her work has been published in leading economic journals, including the American Economic Review, Econometrica, and the Quarterly Journal of Economics, among others. Dr. Gary Barker is a leading global voice in engaging men and boys in advancing gender equity and positive masculinities. He's the CEO and founder of Equimundo, which works to promote gender equality and create a world free of violence by engaging men and boys in partnership with women, girls, and individuals of all gender identities. He's advised the UN, the World Bank, numerous national governments, and key international foundations and corporations on strategies to engage men and boys in this important work. Claudia Lopez Hernandez is the former mayor of Bogota, Colombia. She started her mandate on the 1st of January 2000, a very easy year, I'm sure. 2020, yes, 2020, thank you. A very easy year for a 4-year term. She was elected with more than 108,000 votes, which is significant because at the time that was more than any mayor had ever received in the history of Bogota. Claudia's emphasis has been on environmental, social equity, and anti-corruption agendas, and she was the city's first female mayor and the first lesbian mayor in Bogota's history. LaTanya Mapp is the president and CEO of Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, a global nonprofit that remains at the forefront of philanthropic growth and innovation. Its mission is to accelerate philanthropy in pursuit of a just world. Previously, LaTanya was president and CEO of the Global Fund for Women, and prior to that, executive director of Planned Parenthood Global. She's a Woodrow Wilson Fellow, and Ms. Mapp is also the author of the recently published book, The Everyday Feminist, The Key to Sustainable Social Impact, which I will add is full of action items to stay in line with GEM 24. As I said, we're going to have a conversation today on some really important themes, and then we're going to open it up to a discussion and questions from all of you. I will briefly just mention to our panel and to all of you that this topic is deeply meaningful to me as well. I am one of 4 sisters who grew up on a farm in one of the most rural and high poverty areas in the United States, and that's the Missouri Ozarks. Women there are very strong, and also they often face many barriers to opportunities. I was very lucky that I had parents both of whom prioritized education for their daughters, and without that, I wouldn't be here today. As an adult, I lived 5 years in the Persian Gulf, where I had my own baby girl, and also met many strong, talented women there, and also many barriers to social, political, economic freedom and opportunities. So I want to thank all of you for being here and for the work that you have done. So as we know, investing in women and girls in particular is a human right, it's a social justice issue. But it also has major economic, social, political opportunities and benefits for all communities, right? So the panel today truly has dedicated their work to reaching this goal and to getting us closer and to moving the needle. I gave you some brief bios on them this morning, but I'm telling you that is just the tip of the iceberg. It is extremely impressive what you all have done with your lives so far, and I'm very, very grateful. So to the audience, get ready to take some notes because we are going to talk about some action items. I love about GEM 24 that it is truly action-oriented and solution-oriented. So you'll hear from those successes of what have worked and what are working in just a moment. But I want to begin by asking each of our panelists to talk a little bit about your work and what you're seeing currently. And Mayor Lopez, I'd like to start with you. When you were in office, you made gender equity a priority in policy. You initiated some pretty bold agenda items, one of which was transportation equity. And I'd love to hear more about why you decided to do that. Why was it so important to you?
Well, it was the cause of my life. That's why I was elected. I have the honor to be the first elected woman mayor in Bogota, and I owe my political career to the youth people and to the women in my city and in my country, who are, by the way, the majority. We are 52% of the population. Yeah. But let me sort of give you a broad picture of Bogota and Colombia, which is in general the picture of Latin America. So we are 52% of the population on average on any country in Latin America. 55% of the job market is informal, meaning they don't have a proper payment, a minimum salary, a health insurance, or a pension fund. But we all are kids at some point in our life and are going to need care. We may get sick at some point in our life and we're going to need care. We're going to be elder at some point in our life and we're going to need care. If you don't have a formal labor market with a formal social security system, then who provides that care? Because we're going to need it. Somebody's going to provide it. If it is not formally, public, or privately provided, who provides it? Women provide it. Women in Latin America are the social security of 55% of the population on average. They have sacrificed their lives, they have sacrificed their opportunities, their time, their education opportunities. They quit from the job market to take care of their children, of people with disabilities in their families, or of the elder members in their family. So we are basically excluding 52% of the population for thriving and prosper, for creating, for innovation. So that's unfair, of course. That's unsustainable. But from the economic point of view, also, that's unproductive for women's life and for the society as a whole. So I was elected mayor in 2020 after sort of a miracle. I'm the daughter of a teacher, so education means all to me. I'm the oldest of a 6 siblings family, so sort of large family, of a low middle income family. I'm woman, I'm a lesbian, so it's kind of a miracle that I was elected. But it speaks very well not of me, but of my lovely city, Bogota, which is the more diverse, productive, inclusive, democratic, and thriving city in Colombia. We are 8 million people in an 11 million people metropolitan region. We account for 31% of Colombia's GDP. So Bogota is sort of twice Costa Rica. Or twice Uruguay. That's what it means to run Bogota. And when I came into office, I said, well, this is the reality. Unpaid care work is the largest job of any woman in Bogota. More than 1.2 million women devote 100% of their time to unpaid care work. So I'm just a mayor. I cannot set up a social security national system that needs to be in place. But I'm a mayor. What can I do? And we decided to use all the social infrastructure of the city. We are in charge of schools. We are in charge of parks and facilities, recreation facilities. We are in charge of health centers. We are in charge of community centers. And if you think, if you go to those places, in anywhere, here in Boston or in Bogota, you will see that either are moms who are driving kids there, or elders there, or maybe waiting for them in the bench. But there are not really services for the women who go to those facilities with members of their families. Nobody has to think about how to use that infrastructure to add services designed to recognize the overburden of unpaid care that we have, to redistribute that work among other members of their families or other institutions, either public or private institutions in the city, so that we can not only recognize, not only redistribute, but reduce that overburden from the shoulders of women and give them back the time, the opportunities that they need to thrive in life. That's what the care blocks are in Bogota. We decided to use schools, health centers, parks and recreation facilities, community centers. We had services such as free laundry. An average woman in Bogota spends 8 hours a week doing the laundry of their family by hand. That could be done by a machine. That could be a public service for everywhere. So they have 8 hours more per week, right? If you take care of their kids or all the elders or of the other members in their families that have disabilities, if we care for them, then we can give them back time and offer them the opportunity to finish high school, to go to college, to start a business, to find a job, to do what life needs for you to thrive. Yeah. Those are the care blocks. There was no a paper, an idea, nothing. We started from the scratch in 2020, in the middle of a pandemic that actually had the unfortunate effect to return millions of women to unpaid care work, right? Yeah. So the burden was even higher, and the need was even higher. So it was a challenge, but at the same time was opportunity. We started with the first care block in Bogota in September 2020. We end up in December 2023 with 23 care blocks, serving 500,000 women and members of their families, and lifting out of poverty 250,000 women in 3 years. So it can be done. Wow. It can be done, and I want to finish this part saying this. It was not, as I said, I wish we could have a paper about care blocks. There was none. Or a research about care blocks. There was none. But the third service that we decided to include, and I want to sort of give the opportunity to Gary, who's a really great friend who has helped us in Bogota. So it's not the care block is unifying proximity in the vicinity, different social services and infrastructure to recognize, reduce, and redistribute unpaid care work from the shoulders of women onto other people. But there is a third service. You need to take care of those of what the woman was taking care of. You need to provide women with opportunities, but there is a third crucial service, which is men of this world, you are welcome to learn to care. This is not our mandate or our duty. We learn to do that. If you don't know how to clean your house, we can teach you.
Okay, we have more.
If you don't know how to cook, we can teach you. If you don't know how to read and do the homework with your kids, we can teach you. It's not only that you are able to do that, right? It's that you are going to be happier. You're going to have a different relationship with your families, with the person and the partner you chose for life, and should have a more equal and thriving relationship as you. So that's the third service, is the school for men to learn to care. Because this overburden is not based on anything different than machism, than classism, right? And and fairness. And it can be overcome if we all commit to the purpose of being equal, not only before the law, but before daily life.
Thank you. And that's, thank you. And that's a great transition to Dr. Barker and your research and your interventions focus, as we said earlier, on how boys and men need to be part of the conversation, but not just the conversation, more so the agenda, right? Tell us what you have learned and what you're seeing as to why it is critically important that men and boys are active allies and not just passive bystanders or passive supporters even on the sidelines.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, and it's a true honor to be with folks that I'm definitely a fanboy of all the work that you've done in this cause. First, to start off, to say we should be very worried. Our global data, household and online, is showing that this generation of young men in many countries, if not the majority of countries where we've looked, global south and global north, are going backwards in their support of gender equality. Let me say that again. This generation of young men is less likely to support gender equality in multiple ways that we ask about it than their father's generation. That is not, I know that's not thrilling news to start off in the morning with, but we are not winning the hearts and minds of young men in the gender equality agenda. Why we should be worried about that? We know how they vote. We see that in politics in many parts of the world. We could name this country, we could name Korea, we can go to India, we can go to Hungary, we can go to many parts of Latin America where angry young men feel that a feminist agenda has gone too far and they are pushing back against it. Now, on most days, I just want to say, guys, just get over it. This is the world that we are moving into, and could you just get over it? But it's not nearly that easy. So what do we need to do to unpack that? So let me talk about a couple of issues that are in there. One, let's talk about, and Ashley, I believe, is in the room here, talking about how this agenda of ending men's violence against women needs a deeper conversation with men. Me Too and the movements that many of you have been part of in countries around the world have changed the legal structures. The response to women survivors of violence have increased in most of the world. Our prevention, however, has not. Many men feel they're being called out, but they're not being called into a conversation about ending violence. Another piece of our research, perhaps obvious, is that the men who use violence against women we're not randomly in a room. Although we do most of our interventions in terms of campaigns as if all men had an equal chance or probability of using violence. Our research, almost 60 countries, again, global south, global north, the single largest factor associated with men's use of violence against a female partner is witnessing violence growing up by a man in your household against a woman. It's obvious, it's that intergenerational transmission of violence. We've not taken that into account in meaningfully scaled up work to prevent violence. It has harmed boys and men who are causing harm to women. That's not an excuse for men's violence, but it does tell us we need to find men's stake in the patriarchy that we live as boys and men, suffering as well from the violence often from other men. That we've not taken into account. Second issue I think that we have missed opportunities is around this huge agenda on women's economic empowerment. Many of you across the room represent either national programs like cash transfer programs that Colombia, Brazil, and many others have pioneered for years, village savings and loan models, many other, I know we have a number of INGOs that have made this core to what they do. We seldom talk about men as part of that except as obstacles, which many are, partly because we're not talking to them about bringing them in. So if we look at cash transfers or programs around the world, we analyzed a few years back with the Swedish government, about 150 plus of them, of which 4 do anything to talk about men. There's a good reason why funds are put in the hands of mothers and women, but we have an unquestioned assumption that men don't mean well for their households. Actually, some other studies find that men will also use money in their hands for their families. And we often, but even when they don't, I think we don't push enough to say what would get them involved. And our research and some others has found it's not often all that much. It is often as much as saying, we need you as part of this. And Iris brought up the point of men will follow other men. If there are men in the same community who say, we support our wife in working outside the home and doing this work, other men will get the message, particularly if we make it not just you as an individual, but the collective change in that. So I think there's a huge opportunity to build on this development success story by saying, we need you at the table. We need you here. We need you learning how to do the care work while she is participating in the course that allows her to get into this part of the job market. And that takes me to the third point that you touched on, which is men in care work. We look at the global data, we know what's up there. Women do on average about 3 times the amount of the care work at home, the cleaning, the cooking, the care of others, children, elderly, and else. Where there's a small nudge that's happened there, men are doing a bit more, partly we think because COVID made them do it. Lockdowns meant that lots of men were at home, we saw a spike in violence, but we also saw some men doing more of the care work. And they realized they didn't lose their manhood card as they did it. It was actually kind of fun. Interviewing some men during COVID, they said, I had never had this kind of intimate relationship with my children. Like, lo and behold, I get joy out of this. Imagine that. So the possibility of engaging men around, it's both a political act, but it's also just this immediate loop of, I get good out of this. I see what it brings in my life. Now, let's look at the policy level. Globally, there is no country that has achieved equality in men's care compared to women, just as no country in the world has achieved economic equality for women. Even the Scandinavian countries have gotten closer, and they've got amazing parental leave policies, but lo and behold, men take about half the amount of leave that's available to them, whereas women take 90+%, because we believe we've got to be the providers. That issue that our family will lose income, I will be seen as less than a man, it won't look right. So the issue of it can't just be individual men saying, I'm going to do the care work today and we're going to get on with it. What are the kinds of policies that we need to do? If we look at parental leave, of course, works for those in a wage economy. It doesn't talk about all those in the informal economy that we have to think about as well. But it's illustrative. There's about 1/3 as many countries that have paternity leave as have maternity leave. That is, almost all countries except for this backwards country that we're in that does not have federal mandated leave policy, paid leave. Every other country that has a functioning government has paid leave from others in the world. But it's about 1/3 of countries in the world that have paid leave for dads. And even when they have it, the amount of time is usually about 25% of the time available for mothers, which is a message to us as men that you don't really want us to care now, do you? And if we wanted to design the world that men would do the care work, how do we do those nudging? And I think, so I want to come back to that one. I think we are missing a huge opportunity to say men's lives are shaped and affected by patriarchy, by the workforces that are around us, by feelings of economic precarity that many men feel. And I think that's where we see the strongest association with men going backwards on their views of gender equality. In a sense, they're saying, hey, what about me? Now, we do need to say, hey, hold on. There's some things that are zero-sum game, right? Number of spots at a parliament or a Congress or heads of a bank that I gave a talk to earlier this week. There are some angry men who don't want to get with the program that they will have to compete with half of humanity to get those top jobs. Some of that's going to be a hard conversation, and we just have to say, get over it, men. But the other part has got to be, your life gets better. The pie is not limited. We can make it bigger when it comes to care, when it comes to economic prosperity for more of us. And I think that message we seem afraid to talk about, that men have a stake in a more gender equitable world. And I would say, if the message to begin with is to say, start that conversation with our sons. The importance of boys living and understanding, and that shows up in our research as well. If violence gets transmitted over generations by boys who witness it at home, when boys see their dads do care work and treat their female partner with equality, they tend to do it later on. So I started off with a pessimistic side. On the optimistic side is, boys can get this. Stop there.
So, So I want to move on to LaTanya next. We've heard some about policy. We've heard about boys and men. There is another powerful element to this equation, and that is grassroots leadership. I am still getting through the book. I just got it yesterday, and I can tell you all this. The book, The Everyday Feminist, that LaTanya has written, involves great research and storytelling, but also action items. It's a blueprint, essentially, for social justice. So what I would love to hear from you is what you have learned about why grassroots leaders are so critical And what makes them unique in advancing gender equity in developing countries?
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be here with everyone at my first, but hopefully not last, GEM conference. It is, I think, an incredible view, and actually my children call me disturbingly optimistic. So I'll start there. And also, just so you know, Gary is featured in the book. I use some of his information on a chapter that's actually called Feminist Work for Men and Boys Too. And so I'll start there, but I do think, and I want to say that, you know, overall, I think a lot of the pushback that we're seeing is because we're winning. And so if you think about the dynamic around where we're getting to with gender equality, and despite, unfortunately, some of the perceptions that come from our partners and stakeholders, I do think we're getting to this point where the fight is because we're moving so far ahead. Now, the numbers that our colleagues talked about as we started, another 130 years, I think it's because so many women, and particularly grassroots women, don't accept that that's going to be the reality. And so what you're seeing is pretty much every social movement, and we've done this research over the last century, has either been led or propelled by grassroots women, right? Started and often by the more marginalized women in these communities. I mean, you could, Minos, Black Lives Matter. We talked last night about Me Too, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But all of these, and even those that kind of portrayed male figures as the center and leader of those social movements, there was often a woman who was actually moving that agenda. So the Black Panther Party, people know one person as the leader, but many who were involved in that movement know who was actually running that movement. And so with that being the ideal, what is going to be hard for us is understanding why there's not as much support, both financial, but also social support to moving these grassroots women leaders ahead in the work that they're doing. So it's almost like saying, if this is what we need to have sustainable and transformative power, why aren't we putting more investment there? And you know, the Me Too, and I know we talked about that, and Ashley is a good friend of Tarana Burks, who actually created the Me Too organization and movement far before the hashtag became popular, but who still, with all the work that she has not just done with the Survivor Network, but continues to do, has to beg and ask for, you know, resources every year to be able to do the work that she continues to do, which was mostly domestic in the US, but now has transversed and transformed into a global platform. So with that said, we you know, I think about this a lot. It's like, what is that we need to prove to people that grassroots women leaders are actually the very pivotal part of the social justice transformation that we're looking for in gender equality. And I think my colleagues have talked to a great deal of why that could be in some of the work that we could do. But I would venture to at least say, and hopefully leave with you, that actually lifting up these leaders is as important as the policies and laws that we're trying to put in place, as well as the development programs that we've been doing, and it's the field that I come from as well. Much of that now has to be done, and our colleague said this morning that it's shifting. We have to do that in partnership. We can no longer see that as a top-down approach. We almost might want to think about how to make it a, you know, down-up approach in order to get where we want to go. And I say this because we're having to push back on so many structural things right now. And it makes sense. Women haven't been in positions of leadership like this ever before, right? So now that they are, they're going to ask for deeper change. They're going to ask for much more systemic issues be on the table. And so that means then that we're going to have to think about how to have places where, and this is a beautiful room, honestly, but have places where grassroots leaders can come and speak to us in a much deeper way, and that we're not just talking about the research, the analysis, but we're also talking about the solutions that they've actually already come up with and how we can scale that. And as a professional in philanthropy now, I feel like that is the work that we have to do at Rockefeller Philanthropies. It is, of course, an organization that incubates and holds a great deal of projects. But we have to think of that as the approaches we're building for philanthropy to fund. We have to think about how that works in the reverse instead of the other way around. And so I think about the challenges. I mean, they're big, with misogyny, machoism, in the work that Gary is doing to try to come at it from all angles. It does mean that we have to change the numbers. And what I mean by the numbers is that you look at OECD data, and you see, and I put this in the book, that a little less than 1% of all overseas investment from what we call donor countries goes to actually grassroots organizations. And I'll tell you, it was interesting to the publishers of the book. We're like, well, fact checking. They're like, well, that can't be true. And we do all this research for women, but actually it's not so. We don't put a whole lot of investment in research for women. I'm sure my colleagues know more than I do how hard it even is to talk about grassroots research for women. How do we get the numbers and data that we need in order to be able to not just do the work, but tell the story of the work as it's being done, so it becomes an example across regions, across countries. And that data has shown that if it's a woman of color who runs these grassroots organizations, it's half of that. So less than 0.05% of that funding is going to grassroots organizations run by Black and brown women. So that is that's us tackling these systems. That's us going back to thinking about how racism and classism, even ageism in some cases, is causing us to forget the most pivotal part of social justice transformation that we have in front of us at a time when social justice transformation is pivotal to where we want to go in our future. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, that's a great segue to talking about social norms, which Professor La Ferreira, you have specialized in social norms. We've heard about policy and how now some leaders are intentional about creating policy that benefits women and girls, and yet there are these social norms, these gender norms that are very stubborn and are still a barrier, even when there is policy sometimes that would support gender equity. Why are they so stubborn? Why do they persist? And how can leaders in this room today at least mitigate the impact of these harmful gender norms?
Thank you for the easy question.
I know, so easy.
And thank you for being here, and it's a privilege to be able to speak to this audience. So to answer your question, I'd like to take everybody back in time to the moment when you had to decide your careers. Think about making those important decisions about, where am I going to enroll, what I'm going to do for a job. And then think about the values you had and who influenced those values. The system of values you had when you made those choices. Where did it come from? And I cannot take a poll, but I suspect for many of us, certainly for me, my parents, my mother, played a very important role in shaping those values. What had my mother grown up with? The values of her mother and a society that was very different from the one I grew up in. So there's something intrinsic in norms, which is the fact that they are passed on from older generations to younger generations that make them a little bit not only sticky, but also backward looking, if you wish. And I know the lunch session will be about grandmothers, and that will be great, but there's something that really could create perceptions that the right way to behave is not the one I am maybe even personally most inclined towards. So Iris mentioned that Saudi Arabia study about women's labor force participation. There's a recent update to that that has gone to 60 countries, okay? So this is Gallup World Poll data, and they asked, do you agree or disagree with the fact that the women should have the freedom to work outside the home, okay? In this room, the share agreeing would be 100%, but in the world, in these 60 countries that were broadly representative, it was 91%. So even low-income countries, countries that have very different social structures, nowadays hold values that are quite aligned. There were exceptions. Asim, sorry, Pakistan was around 60%. Indonesia was also in that ballpark, but the world average was 91%. Then they asked, do you think that other people in your society agree with that statement? Okay, how many other people? And that expectation was 20 percentage points lower. Okay, so people consistently thought that, yeah, they themselves would be in favor, but the others not so much. And especially they were thinking that men were less supportive. So when you split it by how many men and how many women would be supportive, they had pessimistic beliefs about men. So the study in Saudi Arabia had an action, which was, let me now open these votes and tell you how many are in support. So I correct this misperception. This world representative poll did not correct the misperception, but we can think of some tools being tools that allow to disseminate information and to kind of coordinate on where society has moved. And I hope we'll have time to talk a bit about the media as one potential tool for coordinating. But there is one way of the world, one view of the world where actually there's reason for optimism, but some of the reasons we're held back is just lack of information and misperception. There's a view of the world where, those 60%, those 40% not in favor, they have values that they hold for reasons that we don't need to judge. And the question becomes, how do we make those societies more gender equal? And that's where education, I agree, becomes a crucial input. A group of researchers worked in Haryana, one of the states of India, to embed in the curriculum of high school students basically weekly discussions about what it means to be a girl or a boy in that society, what girls and boys should be allowed to do. They had role play, they had sessions to empathize, they had all sorts of stimuli to have those conversations. And then 2 years later, it turns out that the boys who were educated in those classrooms were doing more work at home, chores, okay? So there's a way in which if you can shape values at the right time through education, through role models, change the aspirations of these young members of society, maybe even the segment that's not held back by misperceptions, but by true own disagreement, can be helped to move forward. And finally, I think there's sometimes there's an element of identity that gets associated with complying with the norm. Why do people comply with the norm? Either they're afraid of being punished if they deviate, or they believe it's actually a good thing. And this identity, we need to separate what's intrinsic to you being a good member of a certain culture or of a certain religion and so on, and what instead is just an artifact of that. And some of the work I've done in recent years is on a norm that's female genital cutting. It's a very widespread norm, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And there's a country, Sierra Leone, where this norm is actually part of a ritual that is very, very important for girls. It's a month-long, it's an initiation ritual that lasts for 1 month. And girls together are taught how to become mothers, how to become wives. They enter a so-called secret society. It's called Bondo in Sierra Leone. And it's something that you don't want to take away. It's really important for their support network later in life. But the bondo concludes with the ceremony of cutting. And we worked with a local NGO who for many years now has been advocating this bondo without cutting ritual. That means let's preserve everything that you value about the norm, but you, by yourself, as a group, as a community, find another sign, find another, something that replaces that harmful aspect, but that has the same cultural value. So I think in many ways, offering an alternative can help with backlash, can help with the fear that some changing norms is top-down, imposed by a system of values that's different from yours. And that requires, I think, a respect for where that norm that we judge as backward or harmful is coming from, but also the willingness to work together to find alternative solutions.
Thank you. I'm listening to all four of our panelists today, and yes, please. In listening to all four of you, it's really striking how much overlap there is in what would, at first glance, seem to be quite different areas, right, of expertise, which really reaffirms our gathering today. So we've heard some sobering data and some stories about what we're up against, but now it's time to hear about some of those solutions. So I would like to hear from each of you what has been effective, a little bit more about what has been effective in reaching or getting us closer to gender equity. And I'd like to start with you, Mayor Lopez. You did talk a little bit about the CARES Blocks program, but I would like to hear, if you can, tell us more about the logistics of how it actually worked. So how did changing the transportation or the using city resources and services, how did that actually play out for these women who were spending so much of their time as caretakers?
Well, so let me give you sort of a broader picture of the woman's life and the city planning and executing in Bogota. So let's say public transport. As an urban planner, I'm trained as an urban planner, as a political scientist too. So in addition to care is what allows the rest of the economy to work. Without the care economy properly provided, not in this overburdened way for women, but more equally distributed, is what allows the other service sectors, which are the core of the urban economy in any city, to work. So it's in our general interest for productive, inclusive, sustainable reasons to provide that service in a better way. Public transportation is crucial. Clean, green, public transportation, multimodal, is crucial for sustainable development. If we keep moving by cars and based on gasoline and fossil fuels, there is no planet we're going to have, period. So building that, and guess what? In Bogota, 2/3 of the users of public transportation are women. Women move or do every day, on average, 5 trips more than an average man. Because an average man is a sort of a direct, linear movement, from home to work, from work to home. That's not the way women move in the city. We go to drop the kids to school, we go to the nursery, we go to the drugstore, to the market. We do on average 5 more shorter trips. And do you want to do those trips longer, long distances, burning the planet? No, you don't want to do that. So have those services on approximate distance to you is crucial for urban development. So if we plan our cities to be inclusive, based on proximity for care, education, health, and job, and culture, there will be much better and sustainable and inclusive cities for women and for all. And of course, if we understand that we already occupy enough land in this planet, and we should not destroy 1 more hectare of rural or ecological crucial land. That's a pact for the future that we need to do. So having packed, compact, dense, inclusive, caring, based on multimodal, clean public transportation is sort of crucial for climate change, for gender inclusion, right? For social prosperity, and also for economic productivity. So let me give you these kind of examples. I brought this idea to the city, and we were actually lucky that we could do the climate change plan, which is a 50-year plan for the city, and also the master urban development plan, which is a 15-year plan, long-term plan for the city, and the multimodal transportation plan regionally at the same time, in the same period. So we were able to agree with the government, with the communities, with the grassroots communities, with the governor of Cundinamarca, who's surrounding I belong to that state, with the 116 municipalities that belong to Cundinamarca, that are 23 of them are surrounding Bogota. As you can imagine, this is a work of nurturing relationships, building trust, understanding different interests, getting pacts, and agreements for long-term inclusive development. And those 3 plans, I can tell you, for example, what it means for women in practical terms. Any master development plan in a city, master urban land use plan, will include how housing is going to be provided, which sort of roads and infrastructure and public transportation is going to be provided, public utilities. Those are the usual element or criteria of territorial and urban planning. We're able to include care as a mandatory urban planning criteria, so that as much as we're going to provide, for example, in the next 20 years, 3 more metro lines, because we need it, right? Or more cyclopaths, so that people can bike instead of for short-term trips using cars, or improving green public space for pedestrians, right? So care provision, ensuring that care blocks with that job, care, education, and health services are provided 30 minutes at the most from your home.
And just to clarify, so people who aren't familiar with the care blocks, these are actual sites where people can go and get these services, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna at the end show a small video so you can actually see how it works. Logistically, is using the school, the health center, the park and recreation, and the community center facility in a less than 15 minutes distance from each other, and adding services so that women can be relieved from unpaid care work and have the opportunities in those same places to finish school, to get a job, to start a business, so on and so forth. So that's what a care block is. It's mandatory now in Bogota that in the next 20 years, Bogota will go from 23 care blocks that has now up to 45, so that any girl or woman or family in Bogota has at the most, at 30 minutes from their home, a care block service for everybody. Second, this is good for everyone. Let me give you a second story. So men, this is for everyone. It's not only for women, it's also for men. So for example, many men who want actually to change, who acknowledge that they have these patriarchal norms and tradition and cultural norms that they want to change. But they don't know, almost every city has a purple line for women who are affected by domestic violence, for example, to call and to ask for help. Yeah. What if a man want to call and say, I don't want to be this way. No, I know I'm a mad man, controlling my wife. I want to change, but I don't know how. There was no actually any service at the city to take care of that man. We created, as long as the purple lane, the calm lane, along as part of the services of this school for men to learn to care. And at the beginning, when we launched the calm line for men who want to change their cultural norms of machismo and patriarchalism to a more equal, inclusive, empathic relationship. When I launched this line, every network and television station and journalist people came in. I said, oh, such a fantastic idea, Mayor. But guess what? Nobody's going to call. Which men are going to call saying, oh, I need help? Well, guess what? 20,000 men called and received not, not a lesson, but help, actual help of how to change that cultural norm and to behave differently and to learn to behave differently without feel insecure, putting at risk their masculinity and so on and so forth. That can be learned too. That's part of the caring system now. And finally, we have in this pandemic thing, right? We lost 20 years. Let me summarize what happens in socioeconomic terms with the COVID-19 in a city such as Bogota. 20 years of advance in social inclusion, in labor inclusion, in reducing poverty, in improving employment. 20 years of advance were erased in a year. That's what happened. We need to recover 1,200,000 jobs that we lost in a year, right? And the transportation system, for example, and the construction sector are huge creators of jobs, but they are very masculine jobs. What we were and walk along with the private sector, in the construction sector, in the transportation sector, say, we will train hundreds of thousands of women to be able to take opportunity of the jobs that we're going to put forward. We're going to do a huge public and private investment in social infrastructure and in mobility, clean mobility, public transportation infrastructure. We're willing to do it. We got the money to push back again the economy. But we want to make sure the women will be benefited by that push as much as men. So we work with them, we train women for the transportation system, for the construction system. And as I'm gonna show you in the video, let me give you just two figures. When I started in office, in the construction sector, women participated in 7% of the jobs. When I left office, women participated in 16% of the jobs. So we were able to double in 2 years the number of women working in the construction sector. And most importantly, we set up the procedures, the logistics, the training, the trust, the procedures with the private and public sector to continue this movement. We didn't have a public operator transportation system. It was fully privatized. I decided to create one. I want a mixed system. It's a very important service, so I don't want to depend fully on the private sector, but also in the public sector. So we created a public operator of public transportation in Bogota. It's the only public transportation operator in the world whose bus fleet is fully electric, and 52% of the workers are women. Meaning the drivers are women, the mechanics are women, but the managers are women too. It's 52%. And we didn't, it's not that we opened a process to contract them out and suddenly there were plenty of drivers outside there and plenty of mechanics. No, we have to start by building the skills, training the people, and making them sure that they can do this job, providing sort of the trust. You are ready, girls. You don't have to wait for anything. Yeah. That big electric, beautiful bus, you can drive it. It's just about learning. It will take 6 months, period. And we were able to do it. We Bogotanos are named in Colombia Rolos. So our public operator is named La Rolita.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
No, we're just going to play her video right now.
Okay. That sounds great. That sounds great. All right, here's a video showing some of those care blocks and some of those initiatives from Bogota.
Visible hand, but because of the woman hand.
And I believe we may have one other short video coming up. Okay.
Y mi casa. Ahora lo hago yo.
Pensé que por falta de tiempo no iba a poder estudiar, descansar o trabajar.
Hasta que conocimos la manzana del cuidado.
Y todos los servicios que tiene para mí y para toda mi familia.
Ahora puedo estudiar para terminar el bachillerato, aprender a crear mi propio negocio, hacer cursos con el SENA, certificarme como cuidadora.
Hacer ejercicio, relajarme y hasta me lavan la ropa.
Vengo con mi hija y con mi hijo. Aquí juegan, aprenden y se divierten mientras yo estoy en natación.
Así como Sandra, Juliet, Liliana y Olga, disfruta tú también los servicios gratuitos que las manzanas del cuidado tienen para ti y quienes tú cuidas. En Bogotá, cuidamos a las que nos cuidan. Busca la manzana o el bus del cuidado más cercano en www.manzanasdelcuidado.gov.co y ven ya con tu familia.
Sistema de cuidado. Somos la que rompe paradigmas, la que empuja el suelo mientras el polvo se quita, la que no creyó cuando dijeron no se puede, la que floreció cuando la daban por marchita. Somos la madre, la amiga, la abuela, que nunca se estanca, que avanza y que vuela. Somos distintas, somos la misma, por eso Bogotá se mueve en la rolita. Somos ella, la que brilla cuando duermen las estrellas, la que pisa fuerte y siempre deja huella, para que otra como nosotras no se pierda. Somos ella, la que mueve mi ciudad día a día, dando todo dentro y fuera de la vía. Somos la ruta que prometía. Somos ella. Oh, oh. Somos ella. Oh, oh. En la rolita se respira un nuevo aire y movernos por la calle se mantiene siempre limpia en la rolita. Se nota la calidad, la sostenibilidad y por toda Bogotá en la rolita se mueve mi gente que vive y que siente. De aquí para allá la movilidad se mueve con equidad. Somos ella, somos ella. Oh, oh. Somos ella.
La Rolita, operadora pública de transporte de la ciudad, eléctrica, sostenible y que da empleo a las mujeres.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, in the interest of time, I think we're going to go ahead and start with our questions. So if you would like to ask a question or add a comment to our discussion today, please go ahead and raise your hand. We've got, I believe, a couple of microphones that will make their way around. So anything, anybody? We have someone over here who has a question.
Right behind you with the microphone.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. Hi, Jamila Biggio from USAID. Thank you to everybody, and hello. Wonderful to see you all. I have a question on the care blocks, which have been so inspiring to see. Has there been discussion across cities, not just in Colombia, but around the world, with mayoral exchanges of how this model can be scaled globally?
Well, I have to say that I'm very grateful to people such as Gary and their organization, many NGOs, Women UNDP, for example, UN Women, the CEPAL in Latin America decided to came to Bogota to measure, to evaluate the experience, to document the experience, and now is moving on into more than 23 cities in Latin America, in Cali, in Colombia, in Monterrey, in Mexico, in Montevideo, in Uruguay. So it has been a great experience. We have done a ton of missions of different women, grassroots movements, mayors, governors, who came to Bogota to learn about the care blocks. We are more than glad to learn with all of them. It was a huge learning curve for 4 years. It's still moving on. So fortunately enough, that's happening now.
Wonderful. Who else? Thank you for the question. Question or comment? And we may take a couple in a row, 2 or 3, and then direct them to our panelists today.
Good morning. Thank you for your enlightening presentations. My question is, how did you fund this transformation?
Taxes.
Thank you.
Taxes. This is part of the city's budget, and we created this. The largest investment during my administration was in gender inclusion, in education, and in public transportation. Those 3 things, I think, were, of course, health, because we need it anyway, but because of the pandemic, And last year we had elections in October. I had a 4-year term. There is no re-election in Colombia for any executive post, which is kind of crazy, but that's the way it works. So, and I'm so glad that there were no women candidates in the last election, unfortunately. Sort of 5 men, maybe. And you know, when they came to debates and stuff, there is always asked, what are the things that you for sure will change from Claudia's policies? What are the things that you will for sure will maintain and improve from Claudia's legacy? And the care blocks came always at first as the thing that will continue. They will continue. The current mayor is proposing another 8 care blocks in the city. And I have to say that this didn't happen by a miracle or by myself. It happens because the grassroots movements and the feminist movements, all ages and all neighbors in Bogota, came in and proposed to me this as a policy. We learned together, we implemented together, and then in the 3rd year of my term, they moved into the city council and make a proposition saying, these care blocks, this cannot be Claudia's government program. This needs to be Bogota's program, and convince 45 out of 45 votes of approval in the city council to make this a city program.
Fabulous.
Thank you. Wow. A couple of others, go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm Alexis. I'm from the World Bank's Women Business and the Law team. Thank you very much for being here today. My question is on the public policy side as well as at the organizational level, so maybe in the private sector. What policies do you see as working for incentivizing the uptake of parental, specifically paternity leave? And so we see that there's oftentimes a discrepancy between laws that are passed and those laws that are implemented, and that there are barriers that need to be broken down in terms of social norms. So what can governments and the private sector do to help incentivize breaking down those social norms? Thank you.
Thank you, Alexis. We'll take one more question together. Does someone already have a mic over here, perhaps? Thank you.
Hi, Anna from the Harvard Women's Leadership Board. All of you are incredible. What you're doing is just mind-blowing, and I'm just so excited to be here to listen to all of you. My question is to Gary. Have you done any studies perhaps on how when women are raising their boys and influencing them, potentially how that is raising men to behave in society? Are there any studies like that? Because I believe that really, as someone originally from Lebanon, I can assure you that no matter how advanced women are, I start with my sister, there's no way she would want, like, I remember telling her, why not have your boy help you clean? And she'd be like, no, that will make him be a different kind of man. So, and it's very widespread across Muslims, Christians, across the board. Thank you.
So thank you. A couple of questions on parenting, parenthood, fatherhood. Gary, we'll start with you, but I am curious also to hear on the policy, Eliane, what you feel, and Latanya as well. So Gary, go ahead.
Sure. So on the paternity leave question, I mean, I think the lessons mostly from the Scandinavian countries: make it non-transferable, make it fully and equally paid. Give the days to men that are use it or lose it is pretty obvious as well, that he can't transfer them. And then you need the social norm piece that goes with it. In some countries, and Sweden started with that, parent clubs a lot, as Claudia said, that men often need experience in learning how to do this. It's not that women don't, automatically know how to do it. They also learn it because there's more opportunities for them or more obligations for them to do it. So the other is to offer men hands-on skills when they need to. There's a few countries and companies that have also said, well, if maternity leave is obligatory, make paternity leave obligatory. A certain central bank in a place called the EU is actually considering doing that with their paternity leave for male employees. So I think those are the kinds of things that we see can be there. I mentioned before conditional cash transfers or cash transfers. Those are usually, they have a policy statute behind them. There are also things you can do to tweak those. Who gets the benefit, or what things can you do as add-on around those? I think those also make sense. We've been finding that a path of kind of low resistance, or a place to get lots of men, and also it's more a institutional policy than necessarily a law, but using the prenatal visit as a place to get men in the door. We've done that in Brazil. There's now a national men's prenatal health protocol, Really high-tech thing. You provide a chair for him. You invite him in. You ask him his name. If you're doing an ultrasound, you show him the ultrasound. She decides whether he is there. Health sector folks said, no, he won't come. And we said, well, a bit like the linea calma, invite it, and he will come if you make the incentives appropriate. Men are now coming to that. About 75% of men in Brazil are now present during childbirth. Again, it's her choice. That compared to less than a quarter of men about 15 years back. Half of men are coming to a follow-up visit for their own health, which also becomes a moment to screen for alcohol abuse, for do STI tests, et cetera. So again, that's at the policy level. That policy survived even those very rough years in Brazil when the Ministry of Health was in very shaky conditions. In Rwanda, we've done the same, but it's a parent training program. It's now become part of the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Gender. It's reached 30,000 parents. And the same logic, invite him and he will come. 16-session parent training program led by community health workers. It will reach 80,000 by 2028. Randomized controlled test over the course of over the course of 6 years, 40% less intimate partner violence in the intervention group, about a third less violence by both parents against children, more women going to more prenatal visits, and her reporting that he supports her reproductive health decisions and being in the workforce. So it's now become, at the statutory level, it's now being built into the Ministry of Health. So I think, all of these are kind of to prove men are movable. They will come if you build it. It helps if you bring a soccer ball, offer a barbecue, a cool t-shirt, give it a cool name. There's all kinds of those things that need to happen, but build it, and as Claudia said, they will come.
They will come.
Latanya, I know in your book that you also talk about, you research and you write about men and boys and the role that they play in this. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Oh, I mean, I absolutely agree. And, one of the things, because I'm in philanthropy, and RPA works with about 500 funders, donors, and philanthropies in 70 countries. And one of the things that is, I think, crucial as we think about how, what are the methods we use to move forward, is that philanthropy, funders, donors actually find these programs. I think it's great that, your taxes were able to do that. But the advocacy work that the grassroots were doing, we saw research, and this continues to be, that close to 70% of organizations led by grassroots women, they don't even pay themselves. And so they're doing this work because they have to, because the future that they see for themselves. And I think we have to, including the programs around men and boys, we have to ensure that these partnerships, these funding and resource partnerships exist in ways that we have to take on the responsibility of finding this work. It shouldn't be Claudia having to go out and tell the world about it. I mean, with the resources that we have, I know at Global Fund for Women, we started a data hub using AI. What are some of the newest innovations happening out in the world, and how do we bring these together to places, the 28 cities that you just talked about, building in Rwanda and Brazil. This doesn't happen by accident. It requires resources. So that's what I think about, and not just, really structured, specific resources, but resources that are flexible and that are core, so that organizations can pay themselves. And it seems, sort of like not rocket science, yet mostly all of the funding that trickles to grassroots groups who are doing this amazing work and sustaining and transforming their communities and cities is actually restricted to them for very specific things. And a lot of that means they can't pay themselves, and sometimes often their rent. So we have to get over that in the world of funding, and make sure that we are actually setting up this process of local actors actually being the powerful ones at the table. So in order to shift that power, it means then that we have to give them the responsibility of determining what they do with the funds that come to them. And so I think it's just so important to, when we think about the success of these things happening, I mean, it's not by accident. And the work that Elena was talking about, and Gary is saying about changing social norms, these happen from the community level. And I know policy is important, but usually policy is to entrench what has already started and to make sure, as Claudia in her case talked about, that it moves on and it's sustained over years. But it is funding and resourcing this work. And philanthropy has a particular place in that, because we can do more risky things with those funds. We can do things that maybe are not already set up in policy and law. And I think we have to hold ourselves accountable for that in order to see the results that we're talking about today.
Thank you. Dr. Eliana.
Yeah, I fully agree. And in fact, Sweden didn't start off as it is now. In the beginning, either the father or the mother could take the leave, and it turns out it was always taken by the mother. And then they said, okay, now it's 50-50, and if the father doesn't take it, it's lost. So there's the incentive side of it that needs to be in place. But there's also, again, going back to the norm, if someone doesn't see anybody in their workplace, any other men taking the leave, they're not going to take it. So it's up to the managers, and we have very influential CEOs here, to say the culture of this company is that we expect men to take paternity leave, and we value men who take paternity leave. There's a narrative around what it means, and for maternity leave, it sort of comes with the role, but why is it that a father who takes paternity leave is valued for the company and for society? We don't have so much. We don't see it in the media. We don't. So there's part of it that requires shifting actions, and that's where the rules put in place by the companies can help. But there's part that is about the narrative, where portrayals in social media, in movies, in wherever, are gonna change the expectation of what it means to be a man who can be very masculine, but also own their family in a different way. There's a sense of ownership that comes with it, which is actually something pretty aspirational for anybody, not just mothers. So I think there's a spectrum of interventions that we can consider depending on our role. There's work that I think is out there to be done.
Fantastic. We only have a few more minutes, and there was a very important question that I wanted to pose to each of you. So I may divert from the rest of the questions and see if we have time for others. But I do want to ask each of you today, what do you feel is the main obstacle that is standing between where we are today and where we want to be in terms of gender equity? So number one, it's a two-pronged question. Okay, what's the main barrier, the main obstacle, and then what actions should we prioritize to get there? So in each of your areas, what do you see as the main obstacle, and what should be the priority? Since this is a conference of actions, I'd love to hear that. LaTanya,
well,
ideas?
I mean, there's a few, but I do want to talk about it from from philanthropy, because I think that it's important to use the context in which I feel like I sit and have some ability to act upon. But one of the things that I think we do is around creating silos, because across sectors, it's very in my 30-year professional history and all the data that I've seen, it's very rare that a woman sitting in a community will ultimately prioritize one thing over the other. It just depends on the context, the local context, the really intimate understanding of what the social and cultural norms are in the community. And so, so it's very difficult when both in philanthropy and bilateral and multilateral spaces, we create priorities in capital cities that then become, you're going to work on healthcare. This is the priority, and so this money is for healthcare. And you're going to work on education, and this priority is for education. And then what it does is it sets them up in some ways to be very inflexible in what they look at, depending on what the community is asking for. And in my opinion, what it also does is it sets us up so that when there is a priority, I mean, COVID was a big one, that people can act and be agile in their communities the way that they would naturally be to focus on things that come at people, whatever kind of crisis. And so my thought is that the action that we have to take, particularly in these communities of development and philanthropy, is that we have to be very flexible with the funding. And when we talk about actions, not to pin people down to something that may be their priority right this second, but that they can act with those funds according to, I don't know if you came into office knowing that you were going to focus on those 3 things, but ultimately what happens is that you start to do an analysis of a community and you find that these are the things that you want, and those are the things then that you can talk to your partners about, including resource partners, as the things that you want to do. So one of the obstacles that I will really like to work hard on is breaking down these silos around sectors. Do you, and I get the question a lot, what do you focus on at Rockefeller, you know? And we focus on whatever the community needs. That's what we focus on, and that's what we actually advise our philanthropies to focus on. Not any one sector, but all the sectors in any particular sector that a community needs.
Great. And Gary, number 1, obstacles and priorities.
Yeah, number 1, I'm going to step in and talk about boys. I think we have a moment that we should be worried, but also a huge opportunity. The World Bank and UNESCO have put out studies in the last couple of years. Folks saw them, but I think we were silent about them, showing that boys are falling behind in school, behind girls in more than 100 countries in the world. In saying that, we're not done with girls in education by any means, but it also means we need to see what's up with boys. These are mostly lower income boys. These are boys who, when they drop out, are less likely to support the gender equality agenda we want them to be on board with. They're less likely to be interesting, caring partners for others who might want to partner with them. They are more likely to cause harm to themselves and to others. We've got to care about it for boys, but we also have to care about it in terms of what it means for this investment we've done in girls. We've had a global movement, we're not done, but we've had a global movement of creating safer spaces for women and girls. What are we thinking about boys? This is the most wired generation of boys. There's tremendous opportunity there, but there's also really frightening numbers about the age and the amount that boys are accessing very violent porn. There are new forms of gender-based violence that are showing up online because of boys' access. This is not only in our more wired countries, but showing up all over the place. India, frightening studies about this. And so one is to step in and say, there's a generation of boys that we have the chance to raise them to be fully on board with a feminist agenda and healthy ideas about masculinities. The colleague who asked about mothers is part of this as well, right? This is parents, it's teachers, it's the media they consume. We've been doing some studies online of the huge thing we call the manosphere, where lots of young men are these days. There's a lot of harm, but there's also just a lot of guys looking to connect and find their ways in a confusing world for them. And so I would say boys, alongside, this is not instead of, and I think that's the part that needs repeating. We too often get into a population focus, zero-sum game idea. This is boys together with a conversation about girls. And then all that was said as well about men's caregiving. I think that's kind of, to us, that dual lever. Tap into men's self-interest of being involved caregivers. It shows up every time we invest in the care of men. They're better about caring for others. And I think the same plays out with boys. If we care about boys, not instead of girls, but alongside girls, we're more likely to have caring men growing up.
Thank you. Professor La Ferrara, an obstacle and a priority action.
So the obstacle, I mean, I see it not just specific to the issue of gender equality, but of equality. We've been talking about men and women. You know, in the coming years and decades, gender is going to be more fluid. I think we need to develop a system where we respect and we give opportunities to others regardless of categories. And now when we think of these policies and quotas and all based on you know, ascribing rights to one group and I have to comply because there is this law. It is very helpful, but eventually I see as the obstacle the fact that we are losing sight of the why those policies should be in place. And if we kind of optimize and always try to focus on what's good for me, and then there's a rule I need to respect, I don't think it's going to take us where we want to go. So I, as a teacher here, I work on education, in education. I really hope that our actions can start very early and bring back that notion of social good and you know, the importance of solidarity and the fact that whatever you would want as opportunity for yourself, regardless of your gender identity, you try to allow it for others. So my priority action would be to work with both the environment and the media system and the education system to bring back some of those values that will be conducing to gender equality. I know it's a little abstract, but...
Great, yeah. And then Mayor Lopez, I think we have about 60 seconds. Not.
No, I just have to say that I absolutely agree with the obstacles and proposals that have been made. And I think education is not only about formal education. You know, every room in your home, your family, your street, your community, that's the room that teaches you the most important things forever that are not math and science, but social norms. How to care for, how to be empathic, solidarity, collective. That's what really is going to change and thrive the world for all. It's not going to be teaching a Harvard room. It's going to be too late at that point, right? It's from the very beginning. It's civic culture, is what we call in Bogota, cultura ciudadana. That's the key issue. If we get to that, if we don't renounce to that, it's not because I am obliged to do something by law. It's because I feel that's good for everyone. For people that I never, ever gonna meet, but I share this planet with, and for my community, for my country, and for my closest family. So building that social norms, building the education, supporting the people who's going this from very down up, and leading. So let me finish with this. All the care blocks and stuff, they didn't start in 2020. They didn't start in 2019 when I signed up with the grassroots movement of Bogota, this commitment to do something about the economy of care. And I said, okay, but then in the 2020 was like what exactly it means. Breaking these silos. When I came to the teachers, to the schools, to the health centers with the idea of the care blocks, everybody says, was fantastic, Mayor, fantastic, great idea, but you cannot do it here at the school. Because the school is only to teach kids. Come on, why cannot we add and adapt and make flexible services for women here at the school? They came every day. It's not that easy. Well, it took, to push and to push and to push. So don't be afraid to teach, to learn, and to innovate. It requires courage to try, to fail. We're going to fail. Doesn't matter. If we try and we're committed to scientific test and movement and evaluation, we're going to learn. So this story of Bogota's care blocks started in 1957, when the suffragette movement of women allowed us to vote by first time in history in 1957. It started in the 1980s, when by first time, by law, we were able to divorce equally to own property. 1980. I'm not saying 1880, okay? 1980. It started in 1988 when Colombians were able to vote by first time in history to choose their mayors. Because before that, they were appointed. If I was going to be appointed, I was never, ever going to be appointed by a Colombian male president, okay? It started with the grassroots movement of Colombia, with a history that has a sad part of it. We had the largest civil war ever in Latin America. So the fate of our young men were to die in war. And the fate of our women were to be widows with girls, to raise in a very unfair world. We were able to change that story in the last 60 years, to elect the first female, but not the last one, and to make sure that every girl now in Bogota knows that she can be done and achieve whatever she wants to in life. That's what it takes.
That's right. Thank you all, and let's give one more round of applause for our panelists today. It's been a pleasure to be in the room with all of you, and I hope you've had as much inspiration, you take as much inspiration from these four as I have. At this point, I believe we're set for a coffee break. Going to turn it over to
I don't know
Fatima.
if you need coffee because I have so much energy talking to all of you. Like, I feel like we should all just like leave right now, go out to the communities, and get all of this done. So, sincere thank you to each of you for such a dynamic start to this day. I'm leaving, well, I'm not leaving, I'm actually here, but I'm coming away from this incredibly inspired. We're going to take, let me just tell you a little bit what's coming. We're going to take a break right now to meet each other, grab a cup of coffee, grab a snack. As you do that, you may be asking yourself, who's actually here in the room? Is anyone wondering that? Well, I'm going to answer that question. So on your name tag on the back, you have a QR code. If you click on the QR code, you will see the richness up here of who we have in the room in real time. This is who's here with us. We have hundreds and hundreds more online who are with us, and thank you to people all around the world who are live streaming right now in many different time zones to be with us and to be with us in solidarity and spirit and in action together. From the agenda page, there's a link on there that tells you all the participants that are here with us. Check out the richness of who's here and try to introduce yourselves and meet as many people as possible. I also want to say Asim started the day with a theme of incubation, right? Jennifer stressed in this panel, we're here to take action. We're not just here to talk and identify problems. We've heard some solutions already. We're going to talk further throughout the day. If any of your organizations, if any of you are interested in participating in our GEM Incubation Fund, in helping us scale up research to action, we welcome for you to be part of that journey with us. And Asim and I are here, so please come talk to us about that as well. Please be back by 11:10, because we're going to start right away. We have with us, who has flown in just for the day, and we have to get her back to the studios tonight for the nightly news. Amna Nawaz is with us here today from PBS NewsHour. I have to say, I've known Amna for many, many years, and the fact that she has given up such precious time that PBS let you give up such, thank you, PBS. We really appreciate it. We may not send her back, though, so, but Amna's here, and she's gonna guide us in a really important conversation next with, from the very heads of state, how does this really work? How does this really work? And we have with us former prime ministers from Jordan and Cote d'Ivoire, to have that discussion with us. So it's going to be a really special time. Please be back by 11:10 so that we can get started on that journey. Thank you all so much.